How has general manager Chris Ballard stacked the deck for Shane Steichen in his first season as head coach of the Indianapolis Colts? We're breaking that down today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On NFL Scouting your first listen every day. And, of course, a big welcome to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much.
Joe, happy Draft Dudes kick off their NFL Pro Scouting campaign for the summer of 2023 day to you.
Dude, excited, fired up. This is going to be good.
So we kind of teased this at the end of last week, but the thought process here is we want everyone to be as well positioned as they can when the season starts to have the best possible perspective on your team by understanding all the teams. It's so easy as a fan of an individual team, and I do this with myself, to get caught up in a bubble of the individual issues within your own team without the context of how hard that thing that you have that complaint with is across all 32 teams, or how difficult it is to piece together a complete roster on an annual basis, and so on and so forth. You could probably build a list of t-shirts that we could make with all of the cliches of shortcomings of GMs, right? Or shortcomings of team building, and my team is bad at this, and my team can never do this. But when you put it through the lens of not just, well, it's my team and it's a problem every year for my team, and it's actually a problem for 30 teams every single year. So it's not a coincidence that it's a problem for your team. It changes the perspective a little bit, and it changes what the roadmap to get it fixed is. So our objective is to go through all of these teams. We have nice, pretty color-coded depth charts that we are coding.
Ooh, I like codizing. Whether that's a word or not, yeah, go with it. Yeah.
All of the players, the key players on your roster. We're not doing all 90 players, right? But generally what's going to be your significant players throughout the course of this season, we're putting them in buckets to quantify what kind of players they are and how they are going to impact your team season. And that's what we're doing here.
We're going to get to them all. Colts up first.
Indianapolis Colts up first. Picked number 4 in the 2023 NFL Draft. They picked QB3 in this draft with Anthony Richardson, and we'll talk about offensive and defensive side of the ball and observations, and obviously there's a coaching change. So there's a significant schematic shift and change, and that is something we've talked about when trying to figure out what the heck the Colts were going to do with their quarterback situation anyway, right? It says, well, Steichen, they like unique skill sets. Well, they got a unique dude in Anthony Richardson. But the infrastructure around him and what they have to work with is, I think, where a lot of our observations can come, and we can have a healthy conversation about the Colts. So, Joe, without further ado, the single biggest observation you had about the Indianapolis Colts in 2022 was what? Offensively.
Whew, man, there's so much I want to say. Can we just start with the offensive line? I feel like that's where I want to start.
Sure. That's not where I would have started, but that's why I gave you the chance to start, and that's good because that means we won't take my talking points. So go ahead.
Well, there we go. There's a win for everybody here. The offensive line for this team has been, in recent years, celebrated as one of the best in the league. And they've had some turnover on the offensive line, but they still have 3 nice pillars of the unit: Quenton Nelson at left guard, Ryan Kelly at center, and Braden Smith at right tackle, who's a player that I've gained a lot of appreciation for. But right now they're kind of trying to figure it out at right guard and left tackle. And Bernhard Raimann was a fairly high draft pick last year. That was a rookie that got playing time, and he really struggled to begin, right? His first few outings really had a hard go with it. But I thought the in-season growth there was really strong, right? It's certainly a player that from the first time I saw him play to the end of the season really kind of helped change my perspective with how he was able to settle in. He needs to take another step if he's going to be their guy at left tackle. But, this right guard situation where I guess it's probably Will Fries is their starter right now. Danny Pinter, one of the backups. I still think they're trying to figure that position out. But I think for Anthony Richardson stepping into this football team, having 3 pillars up there that are experienced veterans, I think you know exactly what you're getting in all 3 players. That's going to be a major help for him as he steps into this football team.
For sure. And I think we can acknowledge there was probably a little bit of regression across all 3 of those players last year. I know Braden Smith was highly penalized last year. I think he had 10 penalties called against him last year. I think he gave up, was credited with 7 sacks. Ryan Kelly dealt with an injury midway point of the season. Didn't look like himself. Quenton Nelson looked like he was pressing extra to help the issues at left tackle. That were, whether it was Matt Pryor or Bernard Raymond or Dennis Kelly.
Yeah, played a lot.
Yeah. So what you end up having is instability on both sides of the line. I think is the biggest observation that I had with the Colts offensive line is you had inconsistent play on both spots that compromise
your best players,
your cornerstones at that on that unit.
Yeah.
I think the biggest observation that I had with the Colts offensively was there was just a lack of dynamic play on the perimeter. And you have Michael Pittman, who is a very, very good wide receiver at the NFL level. I think he's going to consistently be a quality starter for the Colts. I think he's going to have a very productive pro career. But the touches for Paris Campbell, I think the lack of development for him to become a more dynamic player. Alec Pierce, who you brought in as another height, weight, speed type guy who I think has a lot of growth that's needed as a route runner. He's still an incomplete evaluation, and obviously he was a rookie last season and thrust into a big role. And all of these big body tight ends with Jelani Woods and Mo Alley Cox, Kylan Granson kind of gave you a change up and gave you a little bit more shifty of a player. But as I was just kind of reviewing and beyond that, it's Ashton Dulin and Michael Strawn, and there was just not a lot of pressure that they were able to apply to teams vertically. And what that ends up doing is everything was very crowded offensively for the Colts. You didn't command a lot of vertical lift. You had to throw into a lot of tight windows over the middle of the field. It really stressed Matt Ryan to stand in the pocket, and then you made the coaching change, and now the quarterback change and the coaching change, and now there's no timing with the passing offense at all. And it just really, I thought, handcuffed what they wanted to do aside of Jonathan Taylor having his own injuries and issues where he missed some time and was not effective. I thought it was all compounded by the lack of dynamic play on the perimeter for the Colts last year.
Coupled with a quarterback like Matt Ryan, who's not necessarily a threat to run the football. He doesn't have the big arm, right? So there just wasn't enough you had to respect with the Colts and their weapons.
One pitch pitcher.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he could get it out quick, and there was some really nice timing stuff. But like you said, they're allowing routes to develop deeper down the field, whether it was protection or separation, you just didn't get it, and Michael Pittman, I'm glad you brought him up. I mean, tough as nails, works the middle of the field, like unbelievable hands and ability to leverage himself at the catch point. But, he's not going to be a run away from guy, right? I mean, I love his skill set, and I'm excited to see what he's going to look like with some semblance of some stability at quarterback. I mean, what this guy's been through over the last 3 years has been not great, and he still found a way to be really productive.
Early DeAndre Hopkins-esque.
Yeah. Allen Robinson playing. Yeah, he's on that for sure. But even Alec Pierce was a guy that, I feel like he was kind of redundant in this group. Like, I wish he had a completely different skill set, right? I mean, just a lot of bodies on him, even when he's trying to make catches. It just feels like there just wasn't a lot of separation, a lot of just contested situations. And that's just a tough way to make a living. And so I think really rounding out his skill set is going to be important for this team moving forward. But I do like that they were able to add to this mix Josh Downs, right? Isaiah McKenzie as a gadgety type player. Those guys will help with some of that. Obviously, losing Paris Campbell, who was finally healthy, there's some trade-off there. But, between having the complete opposite of Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers in Anthony Richardson now as your quarterback, to go with a little more speed, some developing young players. Jelani Woods at tight end looks like he's a stud in the making. There's a lot to like here, but it still needs to evolve.
So we'll that kind of covers my big picture observations on the offensive side of the ball. When we get to segment 3 is when we'll pull up the depth chart and kind of go over the classifications of all the players, Joe. But we're going to switch gears, go over the defensive side of the ball, and hopefully sink our teeth into that side of the football.
Or sink your teeth into a Built Bar. That's what I did before we recorded this podcast, because these are the best tasting protein bars on the planet. Folks, if you are looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want a bunch of sugar, you don't want a bunch of calories, but you want some protein, check out Built Bars. These things are healthy and they're delicious. They're delicious because they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in great flavors like churro, brownie batter. They've got coconut, almond, peanut butter puffs, so many great flavors. It's like eating a candy bar, but they're good for you. And like we mentioned, they're low sugar, low calorie, 17 grams of protein in this Built Puff. They're awesome. Check them out. You can head on over to built.com, order yourself a box or 2 or 3 or 10, and use our promo code LOCKDOWN15. It'll get you 15% off your next order. But you can also go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club and pick up a box off the shelf. Try them, folks. You'll thank us later.
Defensively, for the Indianapolis Colts, my number one takeaway is, holy cow, are their defensive tackles good in the lineup. With DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart.
Dude.
Those dudes
are
really good.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some brick houses in there. And DeForest, I mean, from a dynamic athleticism perspective, too, and range and effort and length, and he's everything you remembered he was in San Francisco, and he's just continued to stack dubs as a player with the Colts, and well worth that. He got 20?
20, yeah.
My guy's going to mess around and be outside the top 8 in defensive tackle contracts here pretty soon. He's going to look like a pretty good value, but Grover Stewart, maybe not as disruptive, but those two guys for me, that was the obvious number one takeaway for me.
Yeah, and some of those reps with DeForest Buckner, they even let him rush off the edge, man. And this guy was just collapsing the width, dude. He was, everything you hoped he'd be. I guess that's a great take. I respect that a ton. I loved watching Grover Stewart especially. I feel like this team has a lot going for them at linebacker. And, obviously Shaquille Leonard's their guy, but he had a back injury last year, right? He played 3 or 4 games, if that, something, just a very small amount of time on the field. They lost Bobby Okereke in free agency, but they still have Shaquille Leonard coming back. But whether it was Zaire Franklin in his 7th season looking like a really nice player, or EJ Speed, even both of those guys, I'm like, wow, this team's got some linebackers. And like last year to have all 4 of those dudes, obviously Leonard being injured. But I feel really good about what they were able to kind of transition into, and having both Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed at their disposal to kind of figure it out around Shaquille Leonard. I think they got a nice trio of backers there in Indy.
I'm glad you mentioned Zaire Franklin, just because as I continue to really watch him specifically, and obviously the production speaks for itself. His previous career high in tackles was 40, and he had 167 last year, right? So
did he have that many, dude? That's
4x
crazy.
his previous high.
He had his career worth of tackles last year.
Yeah, he actually had 60 more tackles than he had in his first 4 seasons combined last year, right? And tackles, you understand tackles aren't the be-all, end-all statistic for linebackers, but 12 tackles for loss. He hit the quarterback a ton. He had 6 passes defensed. He had 2 forced fumbles. He had 3 sacks. And it's the way he gets downhill, too. There was one play against what was the second game that I watched?
Steelers by chance?
It was the Steelers.
Steelers? He had some nice fills.
It was the Steelers. That play where he's calling out the outside zone run to the left, and they jump the back in the pre-snap, and he immediately points it out, and they run his way, and the way he works over top of the climbing offensive lineman and then shoots forward to gain depth into the backfield and then still rip across the face of a lead blocker and come to balance on Najee Harris and make the tackle was a really nice embodiment. He had another play in that Steelers game where he comes downhill and he smacks the guard and then gets off the guard. Like it was the blend of range, length, block deconstruction skills, and the tackling that all pieced together for me. That just a phenomenal season. I was blown away by how good I thought he played.
What was your takeaway of Kwity Paye? First round pick a few years ago out of Michigan, an edge rusher, a player they really need to be an impact guy. Where were you with him?
So I look at Deo and Kwity and Tyquan Lewis, and like Yannick Ngakoue is a little bit of a different build, right?
Right.
But they've had this type on the edge. It's these 270-pound, long. I think you've got some inside-outside versatility. And I think they're all cut from the same cloth. And in the same way that I thought their offensive skill set was too redundant, I thought all these pass rushers were too redundant. And Kwity Paye did not, whatever his athletic profile was expected to be, right, from a testing perspective, dynamic athleticism, I thought they were too lethargic on the edge. I thought they gave up a lot. They gave up the edges to a lot of quarterbacks getting outside the pocket and rolling. I think their ability to flash in space in short spaces and collapse down the line of scrimmage. The Raiders game was an awesome contrast of Chandler Jones and Max Crosby when I was watching the Colts play offense, and then when the Colts are on defense and you're watching their edge players try to pursue Derek Carr. I just didn't think they were... I think they're a little too heavy there.
Mm-hmm.
And Kwity Paye especially was one for me that I don't think he's necessarily fulfilling a sexy role in that offense. I don't think from a pass rush ceiling perspective, he's going to offer you what you would expect with where he was drafted, unless maybe there's a little bit of a body composition and ideological change on how they play defense up front.
Yeah. I came up with similar thoughts, and that's something that I've thought a lot about. I don't want to make this about the Bills, but it's a very similar thing, a little bit too heavy, and you really enjoyed seeing a Von Miller, right? A different type of skill set come in there. And I hope that I think variety with your rush arsenal is important, just like it would be for an RB stable or a wide receiver core.
I think Ebukam will help that.
Yeah, I agree. He's a nice addition. Didn't have to pay him $1 gazillion either.
Yeah.
And I think him being there to go with Paye and then some of the other guys that played more, being maybe more rotational, the Tyquan Lewis's, the Dio from Vanderbilt, that guy. I went for it and I pulled the plug.
Odin Yingbo, I think it is.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Let me get one more point in here on this defense. Interesting, the two corners that they drafted, Juju Brents out of Kansas State, Darius Rush out of South Carolina. They seem to fit, what you'd think a Gus Bradley defense would want, but also interesting that they leaned into, they rotated quite a bit at corner, but Isaiah Rodgers, who's like 5'11", 170, who I think is a good player, but not necessarily the scheme fit or stylistic player that you would expect. And then they, invest a couple of picks here on corners that are the tall, long, that type of profile. And so I wonder if there's a little bit of a transition with what they want to do with corners.
Well, I certainly think there is. And then you consider that you're moving on from Stephon Gilmore, who still very much can go based off of last year's tape.
He can mirror and match still.
Level.
Yeah.
This was the Brandon Fakeson type.
Oh
players,
God,
was what they ended up bringing.
He was the guy on their defense.
You're hoping you have better versions of that with Darius Rush and Juju Brents, right? That's the goal.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you how many times I was watching the Colts and I'm like, there's 31 again. You know what I mean? 31. They're going to be better because that guy's no longer on their defense.
Shout out Kenny Moore, though. Kenny Moore, really sturdy, probably put in some positions with matchup stuff to play outside more than I would have expected in stretches of play. And thought he handled it well. Really combative at the catch point. He had a lot put on his plate as far as getting down in the run fits, too.
Yep.
There's some of these where they're running nickel pressures or they're expecting him to run from the slot and get down into the C-gap with a tight end attached to the formation. and fit the run. So they put a lot on his plate.
Yep.
I thought they put a lot on some of these DBs to get involved in the run game and fit some pretty ambitious gaps from where they were starting in pre-snap looks. But I generally agree. I think that there's a lot to like here. I think kind of the trap that it felt like Ballard fell into with going and getting the same type of player with pass catchers, they fell into with pass rushers other than Yannick Ngakoue, but then teams would run at Yannick when he was on the field and really tested him. So I think that's I think what I'm excited for from the edge group and getting a little bit more well-rounded is, A, you're going to get Shaq Leonard back, and that's going to be a big win for you. But then also the different body types at corner and getting Ebukam to step into the role that Yannick Ngakoue played, where I think he can be a more well-rounded player.
All right, so in just a moment here, we're going to talk about some of the discrepancies that you and I had when classification disagreements, so a little bit of debate coming up here in just a moment.
So I'll go ahead and I'll pull the depth chart up. And there was a lot of consensus for Joe and I. Joe, what was your thought on the distribution, first and foremost, of the I think I can go up here and scroll, show everybody? No, I cut it off. So the navy blue is roster cornerstones. The light blue is quality starters. The yellow is adequate starters. The orange is replacement level players. Purple is quality depth. Non-roster caliber is red, and there's none of that on this roster. Pink is incomplete evaluations. And gray is practice squad caliber players. So for those of you who are just listening to the podcast, we're going to talk through not every name, but we're going to do big picture based off of those buckets. Cornerstones, quality starters, adequate starters, rookies are green, adequate starters are yellow, replacement level, quality depth, non-roster caliber, incomplete evaluations, and practice squad caliber players. So what was your biggest observation from the consensus? Everything that's on the screen for those of you watching on YouTube is the consensus that Joe and I had in doing separate film evaluations and comparing notes after the fact.
Wow. I think I really have two prevailing thoughts, if I may. One of them is their franchise cornerstones. Quenton Nelson, John Taylor, Shaquille Leonard. You know, there's others, but I wanted to highlight DeForest Buckner's in that mix as well. But those three that I mentioned first, a guard, a running back, and an off-ball linebacker, but also guys that aren't coming off their best seasons. You know, Leonard, we talked about injuries. Jonathan Taylor was injured quite a bit. And then Q Nelson was kind of stressed there, I think, to make up for what was kind of happening at left tackle and really be the tone setter. Like he was a great player, but was he the dominant player I watched his first few seasons? No, I didn't get the same warm and fuzzies there. So that was kind of my overarching thoughts on their top end, but also there's a lot of pink and there's a lot of green here, which is incomplete evaluations and rookies, right? Which is, you would expect that to be the case with the reset, right? With coaching, right? I know it's interesting because you have Chris Ballard as a long tenured GM, but a lot of this is going to be one of the teams that I think that their range of outcomes is going to be pretty significant when we get through this entire project and just realize how many unknown players at this point they're going to be relying on.
Yeah, so if you're just looking at incomplete evaluations, which is players who can have any degree of range of outcomes, and some of them are incomplete, and you would be debating whether or not you think they're a depth player or replacement level player. Some of them are debating whether they're an adequate starter or a quality depth player. So like it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
But you have Alec Pierce at wide receiver. You have Josh Downs as a rookie, and that's an incomplete evaluation as potentially starting in the slot. You have Bernard Raymond, your starting left tackle. You have Jelani Woods, your starting tight end. You have your starting free safety in Rodney Thomas, who was a 7th-round pick last year. Your third safety, Nick Cross, who was a mid-round pick. Like, you have a lot of, oh, by the way, quarterback Anthony Richardson. You have no idea what kind of outcome you're going to get. And those are the players that I think are the X-factor needle movers. So when you try to project the Colts, if you have a lot of faith in all of those players, you could probably talk yourself into a favorable end-of-year outcome. But I don't think 2023 is going to define anything that the Colts do. They just have to have progress and have these players show signs of life.
I'd agree.
So, as far as disagreements,
Mm-hmm.
let me pull up my personal sheet on my other screen here.
So as Kyle does that, we both independently studied the Colts, right? We watched film, we studied their roster, their players, all the dynamics, and then we individually categorized these players or codized these players, right?
Codized, there it is.
And when we synced up before this podcast, we realized that we had some discrepancies, and so we're going to work through those right now.
Let's start with Braden Smith.
Yeah.
We
see, you already dumped some of your talking points, penalties and sacks. I heard you already.
Yes, I made sure I subliminally threw that in there as part of my
loud and clear
early case. We had 2 starting offensive linemen that we did not come to consensus on. We only had 3 players on the offensive depth chart we didn't see eye to eye on as far as without comparing notes. The other's Will Fries that we'll do next. So Braden Smith. Would you? I've kind of already expressed my holdups, and I know sacks are not a one-size-fits-all thing, so I'm not married to. I put him in the adequate starter bucket. I believe you put him in quality starter bucket.
Yeah, I think he's just been really consistent for them across a number of seasons. Been a starter since 2018. I know his sacks and penalties were up this past year, but like that's not consistent with previous years, right? I think it was a little bit of a blip. We talked about some of their dynamics. So you got a tough quarterback to block for, and Matt Ryan, who's is gonna not be able to avoid anything. You had Sam Ehlinger and your rhythm was off. I don't know. I think there was reasons for some of that stuff. I just feel like as a $17.5 million a year right tackle who's been consistent for them, maybe even their most consistent performer last year on that O-line. I want to put him in a little higher bucket.
Okay. So I'm not married to adequate starter, so I'll meet you with quality starter. I guess my only question is, you had mentioned the financials.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of weight are you carrying with financials? Because as I studied Braden, I didn't even look at his contract because I knew he was some relatively high floor player.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, I think his floor is an adequate starter, so he's justified to have a starting spot. I didn't really think the financials were going to move the needle for me one way or another.
I don't think that they're going to.
Yeah. Me asking you your angle, because we have these buckets, but our definitions of them, that's why we are looking to do a consensus version of them, so we're just on the same page.
I think sometimes the financials can tell you something, but there's going to be times where teams are playing a franchise cornerstone and they're not a franchise cornerstone, right? Like that's going to be the case and vice versa. So I thought that it was just kind of, I used the financials there to support like, hey, this is a player that's proven over a period of time that they're paying him like he's one of the better right tackles in the game. I thought that gave it some merit to like, hey, there's buy-in here.
Okay, that's fair. Will Fries is our other consensus as a starter on the offensive side of the ball that we need to come to. I had him as a replacement level player. He was the 250th overall selection in the 2021 NFL draft out of Penn State. You had him incomplete.
Yeah, I mean, he guys played 664 snaps in his career, started like 8 games. If Bernard Rabin's an incomplete evaluation, then I think Will Fries is as well. I'm not optimistic here, but
so I like the case that you make. I guess my counterpoint would be, I know what I thought he was out of Penn State, and he hasn't showed me anything for me to not believe that that's what he is, and he got drafted 250th overall.
Well, I mean, that's going to open up a lot, though, right? Like, I know what I thought of certain players and kind of what they show me through a small sample size, but like this, that's affirming it. I don't know. I don't know that I've learned enough about him.
Okay. Well, I think I also look. I had the Colts last year as one of my pro teams. Yeah. So I came in feeling like I felt pretty confident in what I thought of a lot of the guys. If we're taking sample size and we want to, by the end of 2023, we will know what bucket Will Fries belongs in, correct?
I think firmly. I'm not going to fight hard here. I just, I had him as.
I've already put him in pink. So okay. He'll be another incomplete evaluation.
Okay.
So you've won both of these battles thus far.
Wow. Okay.
How about Ashton Dulin?
I had him in replacement level, I'm sure.
I had him as quality depth.
And I have him as replacement level.
So, where I talked myself into Ashton Dulin was what the Colts are offensively, or what they have been offensively, right? Run-heavy team. Really likes to get out there and pound the rock. And Ashton Dulin took almost half of his snaps last year offensively were blocking. And at 215 pounds, with that frame, I think he afforded enough in not a receiver role to be a complementary blocking wide receiver that you would feel comfortable with continuing to play on special teams, that I was totally cool. And he played almost 200 snaps on special teams last year, and he was quite good in last year as well. He had like 14 tackles on special teams in 2021.
All right, you're going to win this one because I think you gave more credit to blocking and special teams as a depth player than I did. And I did for Grant Stewart, right? And I gave Grant Stewart a quality depth label for all of those reasons. And I focused way too much on, 33 catches in 4 years. With Dulin, I think you have this correct.
Okay. So there's our consensus through everything else that we had. We have now Will Fries is an incomplete evaluation. Braden Smith is a quality starter. Ashton Dulin as quality depth. On the defensive side of the ball, we had 3 players who we did not see eye to eye on as well. Only one starter, though, and it's Zaire Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all the way in.
See, you're just a little more willing to do it. I gave him a yellow, an adequate starter, and you gave him the quality starter. And I couldn't get there because, it was his 5th season, right? And it was his first extended action. It's like, I don't know, quality starter. We're going to put him in the same bucket as Kenny Moore, who's been a very consistent player for that defense for a number of years. If he goes out and has the year that I think he can, I think he'll be in that quality starter. But how much of this do we want to project? That's where I got a little uncomfortable with going higher.
Okay. Well, I think the thing that helped me was just knowing he was stuck behind Shaq Leonard and Bobby Okereke. Okereke played 1,100 snaps in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So when he gets the opportunity, the caliber of play was there. So yes, I was not so much hung up on first time doing it and saying, well, if I'm looking at who Zaire Franklin is right now, he was the best linebacker on the team throughout the course of the season last year when you combine caliber of play with availability with versatility. So that's why I put him in the quality starter bucket.
I don't know if I'm willing to come up here.
Okay, let me ask you this. What would stop us after the year from coming back down if he regresses?
Wouldn't you rather him go up, though? I feel like I'd want to take this from, this is where he's at. I think if he validates it, it can go up. As opposed to, well, I think he's here, but, maybe he's not, and bring him back down. I don't know. I'd want to go negotiate up if I can.
Where would you have put Bobby Okereke? Obviously, that's we'll do him when we do the Giants, but we've now watched the Colts.
I thought Franklin and Okereke has some nice splash plays, but I thought Franklin and speed popped more for me at linebacker than Okereke did.
Okay,
to be honest with you.
So we agree in that front.
Yeah, I'd put him in yellow.
You'd put Okereke in yellow?
Yeah.
And
I don't think he's an impact starter.
You from putting Zaire Franklin there is just sample size.
Correct.
Okay. Well, America, you are my witnesses. We're gonna put him in yellow because we got other stuff to do today. We can sit here, go back and forth the whole time. I put him in yellow. On my ballot, he's blue.
We both really like the player. We're just,
yes, we do.
We see him the same way. It's just, you're more willing to say, this guy's a quality
I think
starter.
that's what he is right now. Yeah. Because we did this project last year, and there were some players on teams that came down. So I'm not as, I guess, off-put of the idea of bumping somebody back down. That's all. McTelvin Agim, depth player. We have two depth defensive linemen. McTelvin Agim and Khalid Kareem.
Okay.
I know you had mentioned in the pre-show, these are the only two other players that we did not see eye to eye on. Agim, I know your point of reference was you put him as a practice squad caliber player because he's a third-year player and hasn't played a lot of snaps.
Then I did. I did put him as a practice squad player. I mean, was a third rounder in 2020 for Denver. Played 230 snaps across 2 seasons. Didn't play at all last year. Now he's on the Colts. So I don't know. I don't know that he's much of a factor to make this roster.
And I had put him as a replacement level player on the same tier as like Taven Bryan.
And Taven Bryan's that's exactly why I couldn't put him in the same bucket, because Taven Bryan has accomplished something over the last 6 years in the NFL. Played a fair amount of snaps. He's made some plays. McTelvin Agim, the next play he makes will be the first one.
Okay. So that is our only, I believe. Nope. Danny Pinter.
Oh, gosh. Do we have to debate this one?
No.
Who's higher on Pinter?
That was our only – those are our only 2 practice squad caliber players that we have forecasted in potentially meaningful roles for the Colts.
Okay.
And then Khalid Kareem I had as quality depth.
And I have him where?
What's your ballot say, you nut? I believe you have him as a incomplete evaluation. No, you have him as a replacement level player.
No, he's a little more accomplished than Agim. Same type of deal. 5th round pick, 2020, 2 seasons with the Bengals in a rotational role. He played. I think he was injured last year. Right, kind of came in later in the season.
Came in late.
He looked okay. I don't know. I wish there was more sample size. I won't fight you hard here. You want him? Where do you have him again?
I have him in quality depth as like your 6th defensive end.
And I have him in replacement level.
Yeah. So replacement level.
I won't fight you on that.
So, and part of my definition of those 2 buckets too is replacement level players are players that could start for you. But quality depth is a player, in my mind, that you understand is never going to start. Right? Like
you feel like Khalid Kareem is in the bucket of like could start for you.
No, and that's why I put him in quality depth, because I know his role, his future, his ceiling is a depth player, and that's it.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with him being on my 53 as a depth player.
Yeah. Okay, I got you.
Versus Tyquan Lewis, who's in front of him on the depth chart, we both have as a replacement level player.
He's a better player, right?
But there's a world where he could start. He's a replacement level player in a starting role.
Yeah, I will definitely come down on that one with you.
Okay, cool. So there you have it. There's the Colts. That is our scouting deep dive on the roster as it currently stands. Obviously, there are still changes that could potentially be made. I'm going to bring us back on the screen here, Joe, so make sure you're not picking your nose or anything like that.
Thank you.
A lot of unknown with this team, I think, is probably the biggest observation and thing that we're going to acknowledge. And as you see more of these teams, you will have a different perspective on the color distribution if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're not watching on YouTube, hit subscribe on the channel and at least come check out the last 10 minutes when that's up on the screen. I think it'll really help you visualize these rosters as we continue to do these.
Yeah, this is a fun start. We got a couple more teams we're going to get to this week. We're going to get to a draft prospect, a creative concept later on. It's a good time to be here, man.
Are we doing something for the roster reveal on Thursday?
Well, is it going to happen?
Oh, they haven't formally.
Peter King came out this morning and said might not be as scheduled with the schedule. Trying to sort out the big ticket games still. So
figure it out, guys. You had all off season.
Brother, I don't get it myself. I know that the draft probably has some level of influence, right? But yeah, this should have been damn near done. So
I believe I've seen Buffalo's going to go across the Atlantic, right?
Yeah, we've known that. They're going to play in London. My wife's bugging me to go.
Is that a home game that you're losing? Or
Yeah, losing a home game.
That
Yep.
stinks. And the Patriots are losing a home game too. They're going to Germany.
Yep.
Okay. There you go. There's our schedule tease. Hit subscribe. Keep it locked in here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. I'm Kyle Crabbs. He's Joe Marino. It's your teams every day here on the Locked On Network. Shout out to our everydayers who keep it locked in with us. We hope you will be back again tomorrow. We are going to the college route, doing a deep dive on one of the top college prospects for the 2024 NFL Draft. So come on back and see us tomorrow. Peace.